In October 1869, two workers digging a well in Cardiff, New York, struck something hard. They thought it was a rock. They were wrong. It was a foot, a 3-foot-long stone foot. Within hours, the news spread. A 10-foot-tall petrified giant had been unearthed. People called it the 8th wonder of the world. Preachers claimed it was proof of the Bible. Scientists called it a miracle. But the truth was much more expensive. Welcome to VeritaseHQ, where truth meets the absurd. Meet George Hull. George was an atheist, a cigar maker, and most importantly, a man who loved a good argument. A year earlier, he'd gotten into a heated debate with a Methodist minister about a passage in Genesis. That claimed there were giants in the earth in those days. The minister took it literally. George took it as a challenge. He decided that if people wanted a giant, he'd give them one. He traveled to Iowa and purchased a 5-ton block of gypsum, telling the sellers it was for a monument to Abraham Lincoln. George shipped the block to Chicago, where he hired 2 German stonecutters. He told them to carve a giant in his own likeness, but it couldn't look new. It had to look ancient. To simulate aging, they doused the giant in sulfuric acid to give it a weathered, pitted texture. George even took a bundle of knitting needles and hammered them into the stone to create pores in the skin. He spent nearly $3,000, which is about $60,000 today, all for a prank born out of spite. George buried his creation on his cousin William Newell's farm and waited a year for the dirt to settle. On October 16, 1869, Newell hired 2 men to dig a well in that exact spot. When they found it, the reaction was instant. Newell set up a tent and started charging 25 cents. 2 days later, he doubled the price. People were traveling by train from all over the country. The Onondaga giant was a sensation. Even when experts pointed out that gypsum dissolves in water and Cardiff is a very wet place, the public didn't care. They wanted to believe. Enter P.T. Barnum. The Prince of Humbugs saw the money being made and offered $50,000 to buy the giant. George Hull said no. So Barnum did the most Barnum thing possible. He hired someone to carve a copy of the giant out of wax and stone, put it on display in New York City, and claimed his was the real one and the Cardiff one was the fake. Now, you had 2 groups of people arguing over which fake giant was the authentic fake. It was the peak of 19th century absurdity. The jig was up when a Yale paleontologist named Othniel Marsh looked at the giant and famously said, "It is of very recent origin and a most decided humbug." He pointed out fresh tool marks in the pores George had painstakingly made with needles. Eventually, George Hull confessed. He didn't do it for the money, though he made a fortune. He did it to prove how easily people could be fooled by their own desires. Today, the Cardiff giant sits in a museum, a monument to the fact that sometimes we don't want the truth, we want the giant. If you think modern hoaxes are wild, just remember George Hull and his $60,000 rock. For more stories where truth meets the absurd, subscribe to VeritaseHQ.